Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today for the first day of World PICU Awareness Day. We try to give you an overview of a day in the North American PICU, who's involved, what do we do, what it takes to provide care for children. Hope this was informative. And we are here to answer questions. If you have any, we'll be happy to answer. We have about 10 panelists here. I'll be happy to direct the questions. And if we don't have any questions yet, or if they are coming, if there is interdisciplinary questions for among ourselves, we could also appreciate that.
Hi, Dr. Bullitt and team. You can decide maybe this is Anne-Marie Brown from Atlanta, Georgia. Certainly in the last year, we've all had challenges beyond what we could possibly have imagined. And so you can think about it either within the frame of COVID-19 or even in thinking about the care of the PICU outside of COVID-19. What are some of your greatest rewards? And then maybe someone else might want to answer, what are some of your greatest challenges as you walk through some of your routine days, if there's such a thing as a routine day in a pediatric ICU?
I will actually direct this question to Megan, who's a child life specialist, because during the COVID outbreak for the pandemic, that we have so many children, unfortunately, in the ICU, because their parents also had COVID, that they were by themselves. So I really appreciate, I actually observed our child life specialist, Megan Pike, that if you could help us, what were some of the challenges and the rewards?
I take that question. Excuse me. Hi, thank you so much for having me, first of all. And thank you so much to Dr. Balut for inviting me and for being a part of all of this. I take that question in two ways. One was sort of what was personally challenging and what's challenging for our patients. And for me, and also what was rewarding for me, the same thing that was rewarding for me is what's rewarding every day. And that's seeing the incredible resilience that our children, that our patients present to us and their families present, that I learn from them. And to see that even just being heightened throughout this pandemic, our patients and families faced even more separation than they normally do. Being in the hospital is inherently isolating. It's inherently separating. And then to have even more restrictions on who can visit you, who can be with you. And then if you also have a parent who's sick, to be completely separated from your family is just isolation on top of isolation. And then to see the ability, the resilience that continues to come from that for most of our patients. And then to also see the way that our staff and our PICU came together to support these patients was, I think, really something to be applauded. And because it wasn't easy, it's not easy to walk in and see a patient like that every single day. So I think that to start with what was rewarding, I think that's also what was challenging to see that. So I think, yeah, that those two things sort of go hand in hand for me. But knowing that that our staff was always looking to approach that as a team. What can we do for the best of this patient together? So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Megan.
I guess I would be curious if there's different perceived barriers or challenges from some other team members from other disciplines from the panel, because you all have different perspectives, different institutions.
Jenny, I think if you're talking, I think you're still mute.
Hey, this is Lee from Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I second everything that Megan pointed out regarding the resiliency and coming together of the staff. I think one thing that the COVID pandemic definitely emphasized is how much of a team sport critical care is, especially for children. It emphasized the importance of everyone from engineering to environmental services and all of the clinical providers, respiratory therapists, child life, and how integral every single person is in providing the optimal care for these children. And I think we all knew that going into the pandemic, but as we had to cut back on the number of providers that could interface with each patient until PPE was optimized and our workflow was optimized, I think that only further emphasized how important every single person is in the optimal care and outcomes for our children.
Thank you. Thank you, Lily. We have another question from one of our friends, Manal Alasnak. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Manal. The question is this: with such diverse professionals in the team, some struggle with traditional hierarchy. How do we maintain oversight and coherence to the management plan? We have a couple of physicians, nurses, that if you would like to answer that question. Nathan, would you like to, or Charlie?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nate from Texas Children's in Houston, Texas, and I'm a pediatric intensivist. So I think that's a really, really great question. And I think in my mind, it really comes down to, at the end of the day, the children that we're working for. And I think one of the things that really drew me into pediatrics was how children have the ability to break all hierarchy at the end of the day, and that it doesn't matter who is interacting with them. It matters more how they're treating them and interacting with them than a title does. And I think a lot of that translates into the critical care unit itself. And I think we are fortunate to have a dedicated group of highly trained individuals that come together with that same focus of having that common goal of helping a sick child heal through critical illness. And so I think there definitely are going to be times where we have a different perspective, disagreements, and sometimes those can be challenging to navigate and work through. But I think at the end of the day, it really does come down to that basic assumption that we're all there to help the child, and that really helps get rid of some of the hierarchy that is built into the system.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Nathan. We have a question from Brazil. Bia is asking this, how did you manage family engagement during COVID-19 at PQL? That's a loaded one. Light or Charlene, would you like to?
Sure, I can speak for what we sort of how we handled that at the University of Florida. My name is Charlene Pringle. I'm a nurse practitioner in the Peds ICU at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. We went through definite phases of the pandemic, which we're still going through. And at times we allowed visitation, at times it was very restricted. And it really depended on local transmission and how many patients we had impacted. So there were times when still one family member was able to visit with their children. And there were times when, we had adults in the Peds ICU. So we had limited visitation. So we had to be creative, as did everyone, I'm sure. And we did a lot of, we had sort of iPads on wheels that we usually used traditionally for translation that we converted and we used for Zoom communication with families instead of the typical translator function. We tried to keep the lines of communication open and said, if you want to Zoom at, whatever time is convenient for you, just let us know and we'll have a member of our team available And that did seem to work. Of course, it's no substitute for visitation. So as soon as possible, we tried to reduce limitations on visitation whenever it's safe for all involved. We are extremely fortunate in our PEDS ICU in that we have all private rooms that are self-contained. So we are able to, once we get the family member in there, keep them in there and not let them leave, to make sure that we reduce transmission of the virus if it's a positive patient. I think the main thing that I would say that was impacted by not only family visitation restrictions, but collaborators. So for safety purposes, we tried to limit who would go into each room. So that reduced, we have teen volunteers that would play video games with our patients, or all of our child life specialists, and those things, we really did try to continue them virtually instead of just eliminating those benefits during the restrictions and vegetation. So I think as always is the case in the PEDS ICU, we have to be very creative, and something that worked one day might not work the next. So everyone just tried to do their best and keep usually whatever virtual techniques we could, as they were available to us. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Geraldine. I think Colleen Breen also would like to answer this question too.
Hi, Colleen Breen here from London, Ontario, Canada. Certainly the restrictions for families has been one of the most challenging experiences during COVID, and certainly in Canada, COVID is ever present still in this third wave. One of the things that was challenging about parental presence and COVID is not only that parents were restricted in being present with their child, but also being restricted with being together with their child. And that creates its own challenges as well, especially as families are struggling with some very challenging decisions about their child's care, whether it be creating end-of-life decisions or children with special needs and trying to get them home. And fortunately, our organization has been very creative in trying to find ways to make that possible. And certainly now, having learned from the first and second wave of COVID, in this third wave, there are some strategies that are being used. And the newest one is having opportunities for siblings to come and visit, which hasn't been a part of family presence during the past several months. So that's an exciting development. But certainly it is one of the challenges of COVID, and hopefully something that we can support families through. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen.
I have a question from overseas. Can I?
Of course, Luca. We'll be happy to.
No, I saw that in some of in the video, in the education program, the use of simulation for some professions. And I'm curious if you use also for teamwork, so all the different professions together. So you were able to organize simulation with all the professionals together to increase communication and teamwork and team building?
Yes.
Or you just use in single,
Well, lately I see Lini is also shaking her head. So no. Okay. So we use, at least I could just talk for the UCLA and a couple of the other centers, that we use simulation not just for the procedures and procedural issues, but also for organization, behavioral issues too. So how to deliver a bad news to a family, or how to talk to a family members could be also simulated in simulation center, or how to take charge and how to order things. Yes, it is not just the procedure or just the CPR, but the other parts of the care could be simulated. Lately, that in the last couple of years, we are simulating an ECMO CPR, so that how do we put the patient on ECMO quickly, who is responding, where are the phone numbers, how do we take care of the patient so that the big chaos doesn't happen, everybody knows. And we run these things as an example in an ICU setting. We just run a simulated ECMO initiation and emergency ECMO initiation. If there are any other examples from the group, answer Luca.
In our unit at Children's of Atlanta, we have multiple leaders in different disciplines. So nurse leadership, respiratory therapists, educators, as well as physician educators. And they often will run simulation-based training with multiple disciplines involved. So you'll have physicians, nurses, therapists as a minimum, running different case scenarios for respiratory failure and intubations to CPR and ECMO cannulations. So yes, we do multidisciplinary teaching. We also have education for physician trainees, so pediatric fellows, critical care fellows, who are taught primarily by respiratory therapists. So the respiratory therapist might lead certain educational sessions using either low or high fidelity simulation. But to answer your question, we do have multidisciplinary simulation scenarios that are run.
Thank you. We have a question from New Zealand that do any of the panelists keep a PIDS ICU diary in their unit for families, caregivers? Which team members contribute? Has anything been changed due to COVID? No one.
In our unit, we actually have a family journal that is part of an admission packet that family members are encouraged and sort of given some instructions to write down not only the medical questions that come up, but the emotional impact that it has on their experience in the hospital. And so certainly for the families, for the providers, we do have not journaling programs, but we do offer some narrative medicine programs that encourage our providers to use different techniques, literary techniques, to sort of express and cope with the challenges of what they face. And so one program involves using what's called a parallel chart, which is where providers will write down everything that they remember about an experience that normally can't be a part of the medical record. And so it very much focuses on the emotions, what sticks out to them. And this has been something that both our pediatric resident trainees and then our fellow trainees have started to embrace a little bit.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
That's interesting. Sorry, I took that question in a different way. I took that question to be more patient-based. And one of the interventions that I commonly do with our patients, especially more during COVID, when they couldn't have families at their bedside, was like a daily journal or a daily accounting of their activities that the nurses helped participate in as a way to bring family connection back and forth. So if you think of similar to like a baby book, where you would record, today I had my first steps, or today I ate strained peas, whatever your favorite thing was for the day. And we called those, journals. So it's funny that I love the idea of the processing, though. That's a wonderful tool. That was a different take that I just initially assumed the question was about.
Thank you. That's very important too. And I know that there are some units actually also doing that kind of diary, ICU diary too. Yeah. Thank you all. And if there are any further questions after this is concluded, there's the VIFPIC on Twitter, PIDS ICU hashtag. Don't forget the VIFPIC hashtags and the Twitter handles. That we'll be happy to answer questions through that. Thank you all so much for joining us. think with that we could conclude our first day of PICU, World PICU Awareness Week. Thank you.